Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker this morning, Dr. Andrew King. Just a little bit about Dr. King. For those of you who don't know him, he's been our speaker here before, but Dr. King is an assistant professor at the Research and Extension Center in Overton, Texas. He is an assistant professor of ornamental horticulture at Texas A&M, and his research interests include ornamental plant improvement, ornamental plant trialing, medicinal plants, and nursery greenhouse production systems. Andrew is a fourth-generation horticulturist whose family business, King's Nursery in Tenneha, Texas, is well over 100 years old. Andrew served on faculty at Texas A&M Department of Horticultural Sciences in College Station and as the assistant director of Stephen F. Austin Gardens on the campus of Stephen F. Austin State University in Nacogdoches, Texas. So you're in for a treat. His topic today is hot plants, hot new plants for East Texas. So everyone wants to hear about that. So come on up, Andrew.
Well, howdy. Everybody all right? You look all right. You look better than all right. It's good to see everybody. I don't never know, who's going to come listen to me drone on for however long. She told me I only had 3 hours. And then this video thing. I don't know about this because then I can't really say what I want to say. Stuff about Greg, like Dr. Grant. We all have to get used to this business. And anyway, no, I'm really super proud of him and glad he's not here. My name's Andrew King, and if you don't know me, I used to tell everybody I'm an acquired taste, and some people hadn't acquired it yet, and that's all right. But she did a good job of introducing me, and I appreciate that very much. I've got a lot of friends here. I appreciate you for being here. Through the years, Smith County has been a special place, and then of course I see people from other counties as well, and so we're glad to have you here. If I'd have known you all were going to be here, I'd have prepared more. We want to talk about hot plants, and these plants are going to be hot whether they want to or not when it comes July, and so we might as well be ready for that. But first, a little bit about me, and I won't go way back, but I will go, as growing up on a retail nursery and then trying to figure out what to do. The only rule in my house was you're going to college, whether you want to or not. And so we knew we were going to do that. And when they said, where are you going to go? I said, well, that place 30 miles down the road looks real good to me. I already know the people over there. And I got over there and I met, I already knew him, but I got to know Dr. Creech more. And I eventually got to the point where I listened to him intently, you can see. And I used to make fun of him a whole lot more than and then I went to work for him, and I was really worried about that because I really cared a whole lot about our relationship, honestly. And I thought, I don't want to ruin that whole thing. I went to work for him for a year, and I can honestly say that we're better friends now than we were when we started. And so that's a good thing. And when I left, he was mad. He said for 48 hours, and then he got over it. And the fact is that he encouraged me to go to Overton, and I really appreciate that a whole lot. And so with that being said, I will say something nice about him. He's outstanding in his field. And he taught me everything that I know, so that's good. Now, he did teach me how to breed plants. That's an important distinction. Plants. How to breed plants. Dr. Creech here with this Phallus titatum. That's one of the plants that we were super excited about when I was there. That's right, that's the one that smells like dead cow. And so we cut a hole in it, pollinated it, hoped that it would make seed, and it didn't. But we were so excited about it. We had people coming from Houston and all over the place to come see that thing. I went down to A&M not long thereafter with all the nuts, and they have pecans there too. And so that was a great place to be. When I was down there, I got to my favorite part of the job. Every place I've ever been, my favorite part of the job was the people, but particularly at A&M, my favorite part of the job was the people because they were young and they were excited, and we went all over the place. I married these two kids right here 2 months ago, and so lots of fun. And we just went and did, and it was one of my favorite times of my life. And still get to keep up with these kiddos quite a bit. And one of the things that I wanted to do was I wanted to encourage people to get outside and get dirty and enjoy nature, because we got a lot of people who aren't doing that. And so is my little one, and many of you have met Aubrey. You know, this is not the Aubrey of today, I promise. Aubrey of today is a little bit larger than this, and a little bit even more in charge than this, but he's always loved soil. I'll never forget the time when my mom and I were missing him for about an hour and a half one day. And I thought, where did he go? And I found him out there in the soil pile, and he's just laying in it. This is my little one. I love this. And we need people like that, because we got people like this who are scared of stuff, and you can imagine maybe what's on the other side of this. Maybe it's a wasp, or maybe it's a snake, or maybe it's a handgun. The person that this person's sitting with doesn't think it's a big deal, because it's a butterfly. I was watching this tennis match last year, and I thought, that's too good. We need people to take a bite out of life, you know, and that's good. Now, having said all that, I do wonder sometimes, you know, many of you knew my dad, some of you knew my granddad, and really good people. I do wonder sometimes, though, about their taste in friends, because when Dad passed away, you know, he left me with Greg Grant to call for advice. And here I am letting my kid be around him too, and so we got to be real careful about this. The fact is that when I left A&M because of this very thing right here, okay? I got this on the back of a quiz one day, and I thought, man, if they're making fun of me on their quizzes, you know, we got to get out of here. And I realized that after the fact, it wasn't this that really bothered me. There was something that just kept nagging at me, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And it was this. Look at this. And do you see any similarity? Now, I told you, you know, YouTube and him not being here, I'm just going to pass by this one real quick. But again, okay. All right, now, with all that in the rearview mirror, I work in Overton. Now, how many of you have been out to Overton to the Research and Extension Center? Okay, great. Those of you who have not, we hope we can remedy that for you. At the end of this, I'll talk to you about our Horticulture Field Day, which will be June the 26th this year. Yeah, go ahead, write that down. I like this. We got pens and paper. That's fantastic. So what kind of place is Overton? Well, Overton's a similar place to Tenaha, which is where I'm from. And what does that mean? Well, it means you can go to the grocery store in Overton, and you don't even have to go in to get your chicken. All right? I love this, because people think I staged it. I did not. I simply captured it. All right? So anyway, we're excited to be out there. Love the place where I work, love the people I get to work with, love the idea that we're going to actually get to do some things that are going to make your lives better and the lives of the people that you help better. And, you know, plants are a fantastic conduit to people, and so that's an exciting thing. All right, let me talk to you about new plant material. I'll say this, that I gave this, a portion of this talk at the Texas Nursery and Landscape Association Hort Forum last week or 2 weeks ago up in Irving. And anytime you talk on new plants, it's interesting, because somebody in here is going to say, well, I've already got that in my yard. That's not new. And then somebody's going to say, well, that's cool. Well, so that's 80 years old, you know, or whatever. And so I put that little byline in the talk here that says, you know, these are hot new plants and some that we've forgotten about. And so maybe you won't know which one's which. But it doesn't matter, because hopefully we'll talk about some plants that you're interested in. Now, having said this, I love plants, and one of the things that really aggravates me the most is that as a true sort of a plant guy, people say, you know, what's the best thing I can do? Well, the best thing you can do in order to really make your plants flourish is to spend more money on your soil than you do on your plants. I hate that. I hate to tell you that. It's true, but I hate to tell you that. But having said that, after you've done that, then just get out there and go crazy with it. with your plants, you know. And so I love plants. I've gotten to test them in a lot of different places. One of my most interesting places perhaps is the Johnson Space Center. This is the roof, a green roof at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. Now you can imagine how hot this roof gets in the summer. Some of us don't have to imagine it. Some of us have probably passed out up there. That's how hot it gets up there. Anyway, this thing was absolutely, you can kind of see, fairly weedy out on the edges and various things like this, but we took these little narrow inside portions and began to do plant trials up there, various plants that, this actually, the gal in the pink shirt over there, she was a green roof expert from up in the Northeast, and then she moved into College Station and worked on our faculty there, and so we became good friends, and we put this project together, and it was a whole lot of fun, and we did various things like this sort of all over. But this is probably one of the most interesting ones. This is what it looked like when we got there. You can see how beautiful it is. You know, crabgrass and Bermuda grass and Johnson grass will grow everywhere, by the way. You don't have to trial that. One thing I did find that was interesting was we figured out that the astronauts were astronauts for a reason. They, at NASA, had this little sign up there that said, "Go Native," which we were all about. We got up on that roof and they had planted Mexican petunia, and they had planted Wedelia, both Mexican natives. All right, then down there in the bottom where people were, where there were people passing by, they said, "All right, go native, plant some natives." And in that bed, they had crepe myrtle from China, and they had Chinese buttonbush. All right, so, you know, I can't fly to space, they can't plant a native bed, so we're good. Anyway, the interesting part about this was there were a few species that sort of stood out. This is Myosotis, but this is Mexican sedum. As you might imagine, it's particularly happy up on a roof in Houston, Texas, as well as Phyllonotophloris frog fruit. If you don't have frog fruit in your yard, you should. Frog fruit is a native. I actually spent 4 years of my life looking at frog fruit. Part of my PhD dissertation was on frog fruit. And interesting thing about frog fruit is that it was actually a very popular plant. It's a ground cover, again a native. It was very popular in the 50s, and then it fell out of popularity. It was a popular turf substitute. It fell out of popularity because there were too many bees. And people would be walking across and get stung or whatever. And so now you can imagine that this is exciting to people for that very reason. All right. I will tell you, I don't want to be a hypocrite, but maybe I should just say I don't want to be a hypocrite, but here are one. But in reality, I don't always love succulent plants. Just kind of my thing. I grew up in East Texas where we could grow a lot of other things and we didn't have to grow succulents. However, I will say that they are extremely popular, and there is reason to believe that they can be really important parts of our landscapes moving forward. All right? And with that being said, when you're talking about new plants, one way to really ensure that you're talking about plants that people haven't really spent much time with at all is to talk about ones that have just recently been produced. And so there's, anybody got mangave in their yard? All right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 maybe, not a ton. Mangave is a cross between what used to be labeled as Manfreda and agave, therefore the mangave thing. Now, us horticulturists, not always the most creative, fair enough. But anyway, but very applicable here, very applied. Now, this used to be Manfreda variegata. It is now agave variegata. And down in Houston, Texas in about 2003, Carl Schoenfeld, in association with Tony Avent up at Garden Delights, Plant Delights Nursery in Raleigh, they found a chance seedling between Manfreda and agave. Now agave, we all know, you know, sort of what we're looking at. We typically think of the big century plant, but there's lots of different species of agave. We'll talk about that in just a bit. But this agave variegata got together with this agave minus, and because, again, this used to be known as Manfreda, we'll say that it was Manfreda and agave got together and produced this plant right here. Macho Mocha was the first of these selections of mangaves. Okay, now the thing that interests me about Mangave, and the reason why I would talk to you about it is, again, there's lots of new selections coming out that would absolutely be brand new to you, but also that they are a little softer than a lot of your other succulent plants. All right, things, you know, your century plants, they're rigid, they have the big spines. They just kind of give you that feel like, all right, I'm in Central Texas at least, I'm in maybe South Texas, I'm going down into Mexico, there's something like that. I think that there's some of these succulents that sort of look like they belong in East Texas to me. And so that's one of the most interesting parts about this. Now, with that being said, this Mangave, you've got the Manfreda that gives you the red pigments, more red pigments on the foliage and softer spines. So I wouldn't want to lay down in it and take a nap, all right? But it's much softer than your typical agave. You get from the agave, obviously evergreen for the most part, this architecture and a toughness that the other succulents sometimes don't have. And when they go together, you get a very fast-growing, highly ornamental plant. And therefore, these Mangaves have become quite popular. Now, the very first one down in Houston that came from those two species was extremely heat tolerant. All right, now I'm going to tell you that as I go through more of these Mangaves, some of these are not going to be as heat tolerant, and some of them are going to be have real issues with cold. Okay, and so with that in mind, we're actually going to be testing out in Overton this next year or two Mangaves to see about how cold tolerant they really are. And so you say, well, which one should we be interested in? Well, I'll give you real good information in about a year. However, I do think that this, you know, it's interesting. Here is Wag the Dog. All right. So this is a brand new one coming out of. A lot of these are coming out of Walter's Gardens. Now this should perk your ear, and you should say, huh? Because Walter's Gardens is in Michigan. However, we still are using many of the species that were the originals. Now, Mangave can be any Manfreda and any agave, and so they're not all created equal, as I mentioned. This Wag the Dog, we don't know truly how heat tolerant or cold tolerant it will wind up being. This kaleidoscope is very popular. In fact, for many people, it is quite tolerant for a lot of our issues. Heat being numero uno. Pineapple Express, all right? Anything that has maybe less of the red and a little bit more of the green pigmentation, this is totally just off the cuff, and I'm just saying this is my experience. But I oftentimes will see that those greener ones are a bit more hardy for us, as opposed to many of the extremely bright variations. Tooth Fairy, this is part of the Art and Soul collection. Now, having said this, if you're planting one of these guys, why not just plant a century plant or something like that, or a whale's tongue agave? Well, these are going to be smaller generally. Most of these Mangaves are not going to get more than about 1.5 to 2 foot tall. Maybe about 2.5, 3 foot wide, okay? So they kind of fit in our gardens, especially in a more urban setting. Bad hair day, I think if I had a bad hair day like that, I'd be pleased. You can see the pigmentation that, here's one that is not pigmented and one that is. This is simply at the timing of the year there, all right? Catch a wave, so you get serious undulations on the foliage on this particular one. And notice many of them are in containers, which is a really kind of a neat way to do this too. Get you incredible texture and architecture on these containers. This one, Aztec King, is probably not going to be cold hardy for us. It goes to about zone 9. All right, now having said that, you know, up until this upcoming week, it'd be fine. What are we supposed to get now? Y'all keep saying things that make my heart hurt. Anyway, I hope it doesn't get as cold as they think it's going to be, but it'll be all right. We'll figure it out. But anyway, this is one that, you know, I'm almost positive is not going to be cold tolerant for us, but we will have information on that as we test them. Purple People Eater, again, this is one of the larger ones. That's why they call it that. It's probably still only about 2.5 foot tall. Now, having said all of that, there's also then some Manfredas out there, which are technically still agaves. If you wanted to get more into taxonomy, this is sort of a good case to do so with this, because if you were going to take a Manfreda from the genus Manfreda and an agave from the genus agave and put them together and get them to produce a seedling, you probably don't actually have plants from two different genera. You just have plants that have been misclassified, all right? Because most of the time, plants don't want to make seedling with other genuses or genera. This purple passion is very interesting. It's very reminiscent of some of the other purple foliage plants that we'll use in a lot of our perennial borders. And so again, one that would have quite a bit of heat tolerance and drought tolerance for us. Okay, if you're not into succulents, you can now listen again. If you weren't into succulents and you are now, great. Again, I think that there is certainly a place for them, and they do some things that other plants just won't do for us. All right, test. What's this plant right here? All right, Russian sage. Anybody know a scientific name on Russian sage? I'm setting you up, by the way. Okay, all right, nobody knows, so good. I'm glad. It kind of makes me feel better. I was going to really make somebody, I was going to embarrass somebody, and that wasn't nice. The fact is that these taxonomists are just going crazy and changing things. This is no longer, this is now salvia, all right? So this is now Salvia yangii, and this is one called prime time. There's a number of different Russian sages out there that are in the range of 2.5 to 3 foot tall. I like that because one of the issues with the Russian sage that I've always had is it gets a little bit gangly. It kind of a bit unkempt. These shorter, more sturdy versions are typically going to be quite a bit better at that. And you can just kind of see from this photo, it just looks a little bit stockier and sturdier. It used to be Perovskia, it is now Salvia yangii. Anyway, I like this prime time. There's some other varieties out there that are coming out, but this prime time's a new one that we'll be looking at as we go along. All right, Salvia rosmarinus. Anybody? Anybody know salvia? Rosemary is now in this genus Salvia. That happened in 2017 under the shade of darkness. No one knew this. I didn't know this. And anyway, it used to be Rosmarinus officinalis. So salvia has taken over the world, which I don't have a problem with because I do love salvia. Anyway, that's a fun one. Salvia darcii, many of you have grown this one. Some of you have even gotten it from me. I have loved this plant since I got it from Dr. Pemberton. Dr. Pemberton called me about 3 or 4 years ago and said, you need to start growing Salvia darcii. We're going to make it a Texas superstar. It's not a superstar yet, but it is a great plant. This is a plant that is native to the Sierra Madre Mountains in Mexico. Sierra Madre really doesn't get much up above 85, 90 degrees in the summertime. Doesn't get much below 32 in the wintertime, maybe a smidgen cooler than that. It's a fairly mild climate. You would say, why would we ever grow a plant like that here? We don't spend any time in that range. And in reality, this plant has been just fine at 110 degrees. As long as you give it a bit of water, it's happy. In the freeze, it will generally come back. And so I love it because it's a true red perennial. All right, does some incredible things for us. It's kind of hard to photograph. You don't always see really good photographs of it, but it's a great plant. This is up in actually Tony Avant's place in North Carolina. So really, really great plant. Now there are some selections of it. This is Vermilion Bluffs. Vermilion Bluffs, Salvia darcii. So we're beginning to see some people to come in and do some selection and some improvement on it. That's what we're going to be trying to do in Overton as well. Improving a lot of these native plants and trying to put better selections out there for people to be able to plant them. But then there's also some crosses, one between Salvia darcii and Salvia microphylla. One of the probably more common Salvia microphylla you might know is hot lip sage and things like this. So you take those two and you see some real fine texture, but you also see the real toughness that comes from the darcii, and that's one called the Windwalker Royal Red, which is really a great plant as well. All right. Other things, Stokes aster, not a native. It is native to Louisiana. We are in East Texas. I used to tell all my students when we first started our classes, I said, all right, how many, and you guys can participate here, how many people from East Texas? Okay, you guys did far better than they did because my students If they were from East Texas, they would say like this right here. And I said, raise it loud and proud. What is your issue, you know? And someone would say, well, I'm from Tyler. And I say, well, that's East Texas? No, that's Northeast Texas. I say, well, where are you from? He said, well, I'm from Woodville. I said, well, that's East Texas? No, that's Southeast Texas. I said, well, I'm Dr. Andrew King. I'm from Tenaha, Texas, and that's East Texas. You don't get any Easter than that. All right? And with that in mind, I claim northern Louisiana as East Texas. And so if it's native over there, we're going to use it where I am as well. Stokes aster is a native to Louisiana, and therefore it's a great plant for us as well. This is one called Riptide. I believe Proven Winters has this out. Maybe a bit more floriferous than your typical Stokes aster. This is one that I like the most here in terms of just a nice pure white, one called White Caps. I grew one called Mary Gregory for a good while. And Mary Gregory is, they call it white. It is not white. Anybody remember the old toothpaste commercial with the teacher up there? And they said, the kids, you know, well, what color is my teeth? And the kid says, mother of pearl. Or something, you know, that's kind of the shade of Mary Gregory. It's kind of creamy. It's almost yellow, to be honest. But this White Caps is really white. And I do love the texture that this thing gives, the lacy texture from the flowers, but also the scrap-like texture of the foliage. So really, really great plant. Pretty tough. Handles a lot of our difficulties and comes back year after year. That's my sweet mama out in Overton. And so I have been going to the Overton trials for a long time. I'm sure some of you here have been there more than I have for sure. But we started going not long after Dr. Pemberton started them in the mid-90s. And so this is really a dream for me to be able to go out and take part in these trials, but also in the research that we'll be doing. But having said that, this will be part of, you know, anytime you come to hear Andrew King talk about new plants, and we'll certainly be talking about bedding plants from here on out. It's going to be hard to do anything other than that. I'm not sure I would have worn shorts, you know, but that's just me. And if you are around him, you need some sunglasses, that's for sure. Anyway, this is a couple years ago when Erin Smith was pretty much taking care of the trials, and she did an outstanding job. And anyway, so I really am excited about the opportunity to get out there. This is a former student of mine who works for Syngenta, and she's providing me with plants for the new field days, so we're excited about all of that. Now, one of the things that I did, and I think honestly one of the sort of advantages that I have is that I've been to this field day as a kid who didn't care, number one. Daddy said, if you go, we'll eat ribs. I said, okay. And then I've been to the field day as a kid who was really kind of getting interested. And then I've been to the field day as a business owner who wanted to know what I should be growing. And so now I get to go do it as a scientist, and I'm really excited about that. So I hope that all of you will come and participate when we have our field day. And again, I'll have a slide at the end that reminds you about that. You know, you get to plant your flag out there. That's a great thing, and tell us what your favorite plant is. Honestly, my favorite time to go to the trials is in like September or October. I would always sneak out there, act like I was sneaking out there. I think Dr. Pemberton always knew I was around, but nonetheless, I would sneak out there and figure out what was actually still growing. And that's the way I made some decisions. Obviously, I'm not much of a photographer, forgive me. But this is red velour petunia. Well, I was selling red velour petunia and telling everybody, this is a great petunia. You can't get your hands on any better petunia than this. And then I went out there and I saw petunias that were in much better shape than red velour after a summer in the trials there in Overton. And so I decided I would start growing something different. And so I hope that a lot of the industry around gets to make their decisions based on that in our trials in the future. And I hope you get to come make decisions based on what you see out there as well, where you can go to your local nursery and say, hey, we would love for you to be growing this. And sometimes they might say, what? Let me write that down so I'll know what you're looking for. This last year, I co-opted, I borrowed the trials from Texas A&M. As I was working at Stephen F. Austin, I told Dr. Creech, I said, we're going to do the trials over here. They need to be done, and we're gonna get started on that. And I talked to the department head down at A&M. They all were aware of what we were doing, and so I was excited about the chance to go ahead and get to work, and we did. And we had a fairly successful first trial over in Nacogdoches. In fact, we may still do a little bit of work over there because replication and duplication is an important part of the scientific process. But having said all that, based on our field day over there last year, these are some of our results. Now, my photographs of these, this one leaves something to be desired, but just trust me, peach melba was our most popular plant out there for the most part. I love any of these sort of pastel, this Funhouse series of petunia, because you get some shades and some combinations that you just wouldn't get otherwise. And so peach melba was by far my favorite plant out in our trials, and we had over 220 varieties out there. This is Amethyst Sunshine. It got second place. You can see, again, very interesting, light purple to lavender with that yellow throat. A very interesting combination, and just a really tough plant. The Deco series of petunia has smaller flowers, but a nice matte. It makes a nice matte, very lovely texture altogether. So that's a really great choice for you. And there's lots of different colors in the Deco series. If you don't like this particular one, the Sorbet, which again, I like all those pastels. I didn't make the decisions, the people that came did, but I agreed with them, and I do like the pastels. But even if you don't, the Deco series really does provide some diminutive alternatives to some of the larger flower petunias that you might find out there. Main Street, Beale Street Coleus from Doom and Orange. Again, it's not unusual for people to like well, we were at Stephen F. Austin State University, which, if you haven't heard, is a part of the UT system. And so they weren't, there you go. They were not sitting there saying, hey, this, maroon, 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 but it is a very popular color, and in Coleus particularly. Some honorable mentions. This is one called a Deco petunia called Banana, which I think is just incredibly beautiful. It's not for everyone, but if you do have more of a, sort of a fun side of your yard or whatever, it's really a good choice. And then I put this one in here. It's not just because it's named Riverwalk, but this is one of the first plants that really sort of got latched in out there, and I loved it. It's kind of got a little bit of a splash of green, and this Coleus has got some nice yellows in it as well. And so there's a couple of other ones. This pink Talavera, pink tricolor Talavera Coleus is one that a lot of people liked as well. So if these are things that you're interested in, certainly come out to Overton on June the 26th. Cora XDR is probably, in my opinion, it's one of the finest vinca that you can get your hands on. XDR stands for Extreme Disease Resistance. It's nothing new, but if you can get Cora XDR vinca, they're going to be much more tough, hardy, and not have near the difficulty with Phytophthora that all of our old vinca are going to have. But actually, my favorite part of this is the Cascade series, Cora Cascade, which is going to be your spreaders. All right, those spreaders, and again, that's the spreaders virtually the whole way down there. So lots of different colors, and they're much tougher. Even 5 years ago, the Cora Cascade series was not as tough. It did not seem to be as the Cora XDR. There's still probably a bit of a chasm there between the two. Chasm's the wrong word. A bit of space between the two, but that chasm is shrinking. And I think the Cora Cascade is a really good choice for us. And then this is one of the things that I mentioned because at the trials in Overton, I saw the Soiree series for the first time and started growing them and really liking a lot of the Soiree vinca out there, and a lot of that, again, finer texture and just something different. That's a lot of times somebody says, I just want something different. And that's always kind of one of my favorite things to do. All right, anybody got any hibiscus in their yard? I bet you do, and well, you should. This is Miss Terry's hibiscus. Miss Terry's is a hybrid between your perennial hardy hibiscus mosquitoes, and Hibiscus mutabilis, our fall blooming Confederate rose. okay? And because of that, then these seed, right here, these seed pods don't have any viable seed in them. That's a good thing, all right? Number one, because then you don't have to worry about seedlings, and somebody says, well, I love seedlings. Number two, this thing's gonna bloom more since it's not worried about the seed. Okay, so a lot of times sterile plants are gonna bloom more. And so Miss Terry's hibiscus is a really good choice. This is one that it was at least released by Heidi Sheasley down in Houston, Texas. So it likes our heat, humidity, it handles all of that as well. If that's not one that you can get your hands on, there's one called Hoppa Red. There's actually a Hoppa series, and there's a number of different hybrids that are out there now from different seed companies. This is in October in eastern North Carolina, so it's not blooming nearly as much as it would have been even a week beforehand, but certainly a month beforehand. But nonetheless, you get that sort of hibiscus michutos architecture, size, toughness, along with more of your hibiscus michuto, I said michutos, metabolus. You get more of the Confederate rose architecture with more of the hardy hibiscus blooms. And so that's a really, really good plant. I like it a lot, and one that we need to keep our eyes on. All right, Vitex. King, why are you talking to us about Vitex? And the reason is because I mentioned that I talked about this down in Irving, or up in Irving, the other day. And the people from the southern part of the state, particularly around Austin, said, well, is it as invasive as the other ones are? And I said, here's the thing, no. Okay. The word invasive in relation to Vitex should not be used if we're going to use the same word to describe Chinese tallow or to describe other things that are truly invasive. Is there a river course perhaps down in Austin that gets some of these in there? Probably so, okay? That may be well the case. But we've had these plants in East Texas since at least 1870 something. You can go see the one over there at the Caddo Mountain State Park, that's been there for forever. And we don't see just forests of Vitex jumping up, all right? So with that in mind, we might need some different words. But I still love Vitex, and I still think they do things for us that other plants won't do. And so this particular one I bring to your attention, Violet Mist, because it grows to 3 foot tall. All right, so you're looking for more of like your perennial border sort of plants. These are being bred that way. I'll show you flip side in a bit. Now, I was going to say, if you're Greg Grant, almost all your Vitex grow to 3 or 4 or 5 foot tall because you cut them down every year. All right, we call that torture. But anyway, this particular plant is supposed to do it, and I'm excited to see just how it does for us. Now there's your little count, right? That's Greg's selection from over in central Louisiana for longer bloom chains. I still think it's a great plant. We don't let our Vitex, in the Grant household, you'll never see this because it keeps cutting to the ground, but that beautiful bark, people don't think of Vitex for that reason, but they really are fantastic in that way. Flip side is one I got really excited about, and indeed I still sort of am, because even though it doesn't have huge bloom chains or any of that business, it only grows to, again, about 5 foot, maybe 6 foot tall, so it'll do, again, that nice perennial border thing for us. But also, anytime we get a wind, the back of the foliage is always that color right there, okay? And so if a breeze comes through, it looks like it's blooming if it is or not. And that's a really good choice for us. The same thing happens on Mexican sycamore. I don't know if you've ever seen this or not. You go down to San Antonio, there's a nice stiff breeze that comes through, and you'd say, what is that blooming thing over there? Not, what is that blooming thing over there, but what is that thing blooming over there? And that thing blooming over there is not blooming. It's a Mexican sycamore. It happens to be the white shade of the back of the foliage. And so this is really a good strategy for us to use things that have nice back of the foliage so that a nice breeze will make it look like it's blooming. Flip side, Vitex is a great plant. I don't know anything about this one, but it's interesting to me. Glow Pop Japanese Holly, Ilex crenata. anything that's going to sort of get into the market and allow us to use something other than maybe sunshine ligustrum, but we'll talk about that later. Anyway, I think some of these sort of bright yellow foliage plants are going to be more popular in the future. And this just happens to be one called Liberty Bell Boxwood. Now, you don't know this perhaps, and maybe you do because you're all voracious readers. Gut tells me it'll probably be just fine. This is one called Gilded Hearts. It's from the other hearts, Hearts of Gold, Ace of Hearts. It's from that series. This is one that's going to be a little bit tighter as well. Now, having said that, notice this is right here. It says Variety Texensis, which would give you the indication that it's going to be heat and drought tolerant. I'm going to tell you to hold off on that for a bit because, again, they're coming from North Carolina. We've had some others that came from North Carolina that were touted for their heat and drought tolerance that were not heat and drought tolerant at all. All right, because North Carolina gets 110 degrees once a year. And we get it 67 times a year. And so it is a different climate for sure. Redbuds, I can't help but talk about them. This is the Neubauer's nursery up in around McMinnville, Tennessee. They showed us around one year, had all the varieties you could ever imagine. Had this one covered up. All right, we had 4 buses of horticulturists. All right, do you know what you have when you have 10 horticulturists in a room? You have 10 thieves in a room. Okay, and we'll say, oh, I'm not stealing it. I'm just going to take it home and propagate it, which is just Latin for stealing it. Anyway, this is one thing that was covered up over there. They didn't want us to see it, and of course we quickly went over and looked under there. And in fact, it was just this one man. He told us all, and so it was all good. This is Flamethrower. Some of you have Flamethrower, I'm sure. It is a beautiful variety of redbud. Again, in the summertime, I think it gets a little bit, has some difficulty. And so that's, again, some of that toughness and the heat tolerance that we need in our redbuds moving forward. But this is College Station. My buddy down there is pulling the Greg Grant on it. He's cutting it back every year. And it just seems to be really excited to be down there. And so you can see why Flamethrower is one that people get excited about because of that nice maroon foliage out on the edge. Why do we need tougher, redbuds even, but all of these plants? Well, because in the beginning of the summer, this is what we feel like. This is May. We are vigorous. We have a lot of virulence, and we are excited about the summer. And this is August. Maybe not even August sometimes. We have a real problem. We're watering our silk plants. It is difficult. So, all that being said, if you want a redbud, a red foliage redbud, I would go with this one, Forest Pansy. It is it's a new plant. It was released in 1967. And that particular one is still my favorite for a maroon foliage. I'm not just wearing maroon shaded glasses, all right? I accept that, but nonetheless, there's one called Merlot. It's not nearly as tough as this one in my experience. Now, somebody else might disagree, and that's okay, but when I grow it, I get much better results with Forest Pansy. I called Dave Creech one day, and I said, hey, what is blooming over there in the right off University? And he said, nothing. And I said, you're lying to me, what is it? And I went out there, and he was telling the truth for the first time in his life, and this was Silver Cloud Redbud. It's not blooming, but it might as well be. And again, that's one of the things that I love the most about this is when we've got a plant that's not blooming, but we think that it is. This is one called Floating Clouds. It's got a little bit more pink in it. Mike Durr thinks this is one of the finer redbuds you'll get your hands on. Again, there's more Forest Pansy right there for you. My favorite, though, is the Rising Sun. The Rising Sun redbud, if you can get your hands on this one, I think this is probably one of the best chartreuse versions of redbuds that's possible. This is over, I believe, in the hardware store parking lot in Henderson, and that's about August. All right, so that's about as good as it gets in terms of real toughness in redbud. Okay, I've done some different talks when people would say, hey, we got this issue with crepe myrtle bark scale. What are we going to do later? How are we going to replace crepe myrtle? The synopsis of that talk is we're not. All right, crepe myrtle does something that none of these other things can actually do. But if we were going to have to do it, which I hope we're not, But if we were going to have to do it, this would be a plant that we would be looking to as a sort of an example of what we're looking for. 7 sunflower, Heptacodium meconioides, doesn't inspire you over here, but here's the thing, it's got white blossoms, all right, it's got shreddy bark, sound like anything you know? And then after the blossoms fall, it's got these pink calyces. And so it's almost like you've got 2 different colors planted in the same place. There's one called Temples of Bloom, or Temple of Bloom, that comes out of Proven Winners. So anyway, it's one that if you're going to plant here, I would plant it in a little bit of shade, but nonetheless a great plant. You guys know this one. This is one I think that died finally in the freeze of 2020. But your evergreen dogwood that was over in the Idea Garden here in Tyler, this gave me the idea to go home and plant this thing, and I absolutely love it. This evergreen dogwood is one that I was super excited about, still am. Dave Creek planted rows and rows and rows of them, as he normally does, and I'm glad he did, because we see that there's some serious potential here in the evergreen dogwood world. This is fruit right here that's edible. As he would say if he were here, it's useful in a famine, but not particularly good. I've tried it once and probably won't try it again. But you can see when you got that tree there with that fruit, that if you've got enough of that fruit, it is truly an ornamental thing. Anybody ever have one of those moments where you're the scarecrow here? All right. I had one of those 2 years ago. I was at the IPPS International Plant Propagator Society meetings in Raleigh, North Carolina. Michael Durr, Dr. Durr, these books were staples in my library 20 years ago. I still have them today. I still go to them often. He came up to Dr. Creech and myself and said, "Do you guys want to go over to the J.C. Ralston Arboretum with me?" And I thought, well, I paid for this conference. I probably ought to stay here. And then I thought, no. Of course I want to go to the J.C. Ralston Arboretum with you. So I went with Dr. Creech and Dr. Durr to the J.C. Ralston Arboretum and had the time of my life for about 2 or 3 hours just walking around with this guy who's just an incredible fountain of knowledge. Now, the funny part is they're both a smidgen older, and so you can imagine how this conversation went. "No, Dave," I said, "we're not going over there." "Oh, I thought you said we're going over there." And they're yelling at each other, but they love each other. And so I figured I was actually there to be the referee. But it was a load of fun. I had a blast. Dr. Creech showed me one of the original cherry bomb hollies. That holly that has no spines, but yet has the beautiful fruit on it. That's a great plant for us. He showed me structure over here, and he actually did a sabbatical there with J.C. Ralston in the mid-90s and talked about things that he learned there, and it was really great. And then we got to this plant right here. This plant right here is Fothergilla. Fothergilla. And when I got back to the nursery when my dad was sick, my dad had planted a bunch of Fothergilla. About 10 years later, I threw away a bunch of Fothergilla. It's okay. That was not meant to be a groan, but rather sort of a funny thing, because 3 years later when I came back again, I planted a bunch of Fothergilla, which 6 years later I threw away. Fothergilla, not a huge seller. He asked me, Dr. Durr says, "What do you think of this plant?" I said, "I think I love it. I really genuinely do." He said, "Well, how does it do for you?" I said, "Well, I've sold 2 of them. It's been great." You know? But nonetheless, Fothergilla is a cool plant. If you can get a nice sort of shady spot where you get maybe dappled sun, it's, bottle brush is oftentimes what people call it. It's a native of Georgia and maybe a bit into South Carolina, but really, really kind of a cool plant. There's some varieties out there. Their name escapes me right now. Legends of the Small. Legends of the Small. You can see we're getting better with our plant names. Perodia subiqualis. Perodia persica is a plant that we've had over at the Arboretum in Nacogdoches for many, many years, but this Perodia subiqualis is sort of a newer, maybe only been in the United States for 30 or 40 years, but a fantastic plant. Again, got that same color. You guys are getting the theme here. I like that color. And this is in South Carolina, but we can certainly grow it in East Texas, and it roots quite well and is a really great plant for us. Gives us that incredible foliage. And so, you know, if you're thinking about, hey, I want a purple leaf plum, I would encourage you to consider maybe a Peronia subequalis. All right, Acer truncatum or shantung maple. That particular plant, the first one that I really ever fell in love with is in Overton, Texas. That's it, right over there. And Daddy was taking pictures of the trial beds. And this would have been like mid-2000s maybe. And anyway, you wouldn't think anything of it. But when you now come out there, that's the first thing that sort of greets you and sort of welcomes you into our horticulture area. The reason why I mentioned this one is because it's beautiful there. We also grew it in College Station, which is almost unheard of. To grow any sort of a maple in College Station is very, very difficult. But this is the thing that really gets the most attention. You'll notice December the 5th, this was 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago. No, 2 years ago. And anyway, beautiful fall color, all right? The same sort of fall color that you might get off of a Callery pear or something like that. And this is a better actor for sure. The only issue is 3 days later, that's what it looked like. All right, so you better enjoy it real quick. Now, this was this year. December 9th, pretty nice. December 10th, a little less nice. December 12th, December 13th. All right, and I quit taking pictures after this. So realize but it's a great plant for you, and you can get that really beautiful vase shape. We've trimmed this one up. You can see the volunteers out there this last fall. And so I really love that particular plant. Buckeyes, we ought to grow more buckeyes. You say, oh, well, I would, but they're everywhere. Well, you're talking about red buckeyes, all right? And I like them too. Aeschylus pavia, a great plant for us. With certainty, they can grow to be maybe even 15 foot tall if you're not careful. But then there's also other varieties out there, all right? This is Aeschylus glabra variety arguta, which is again a native for us, Texas buckeye. Now, if you look this up, you'll also see it called Ohio buckeye, which really bothers me because it can't be both. But nonetheless, we'll just call it Texas buckeye. It's got that nice creamy color, sort of a creamy yellow, and a beautiful plant for sure. Not nearly as, not nearly as common as the red buckeye, but again, once you get it established, it's quite tough. They're not always easy to find, but if you can, they're a great plant for you. And then you begin to see crosses between those two. So this is a cross between glabra or arguta and pavia, or other varieties as well. And so you get more of that sort of creamy pink texture, color. And then this is parviflora, which is not native to our area, more native to Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, South Carolina, maybe Florida. However, I have had one growing at my mom's place for, 10 or 12 years. And so it's one that you can, if you have the right acidic soils and nice sort of, you'll notice they're almost always right on the edge of wood lines. So they're not going to take the brunt of the western sun. All right? Buckeye's a great choice. Dr. Creech has let me go to Texas A&M, but he required that I sign a contract that everywhere I go I talk about Acer scootchii. And so this is now part of that. Acer scootchii Mexican cloud maple, we have more of those over in Nacogdoches than pretty much anywhere in the United States, and so I'm doing some work on germination for these guys. There's at least 7 trees over there that are bearing seed, which are far more than anybody else has in the U.S., and so Dr. Durr calls this plant an unsophisticated tree, but that's okay, we can sophisticate it. And we're working on that, trying to come up with some selections that are going to not have to require nearly as much pruning or work on them. So hopefully we'll get a nice straight bowl on them as we move forward. But a great plant for us. There's your Mexican cloud maple, is again from Mexico, so more heat tolerance, more drought tolerance. Sweet tea, Gordelinia grandiflora. It's one of my favorite shade plants. You got to have some shade here. Over in South Carolina, you can get away with putting it in more sun, but nonetheless, you say, well, it kind of just looks like a woodland plant. Well, that's true until about June, and then it starts putting these little balls of buds on there, and then beautiful white camellia-like blossoms, pretty much for about 2.5 to 3 months. So a really, really great plant, and the larger it gets, obviously, the more blooms you're going to get on it. Okay, so I encourage you to look into this if you've got any shade at all. Not going to take a lot of space either. Freedom crepe myrtle. I'm not going to talk much about crepe myrtles today. but nonetheless, Freedom Crepe Myrtle is one from a breeder called Stan Brown. Stan, I believe, is about 86 or 87 years old. He's still breeding crepe myrtles. I absolutely love it. But this one is one of my favorites. If you're right up on it, it's actually a very, very dark pink, but if you're about 25 feet away, it's red. And it's only going to grow to be about 12, 13 foot tall. And so it's nice. I have had a few issues with it at all, no issues with powdery mildew. So really, really kind of a cool plant for us. Finally today I'll talk to you about just a few things, seedless muscadines. All right, this is a new thing that's kind of coming down the pike. I am a part of a grant where we're going to be doing some testing of seedless muscadines over in Overton. How many people have had seedless muscadines or knew there were seedless muscadines or whatever? How many people like muscadines? Okay, this is the right answer. We like that. If you didn't answer that, it's okay. We'll try to convince you. But muscadines are our fruit. They belong to us. They are happy here. They don't need to be sprayed. You know how often you need to spray a table grape if you plant it here? About twice a day. I mean, it's unbelievable how much you need to spray these things. But muscadines you can basically grow organically. And now, with that being said, the issue, people think that their skin's like leather, and they don't like the seeds. Okay? Now, we've been fixing the skin problem for many years now, and in fact, there's a number of very thin-skinned varieties. But the seed problems were always an issue. Those issues are being overcome as we speak, and in the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see a whole lot more seedless muscadines available for sale. This is what the traditional muscadine looks like, rootlets coming out of the stem. Again, big fruit. Some people think the fruit's getting too big. It's hard to eat all at one time. You can't just pop it in your mouth or whatever. I didn't realize that was a thing. The bigger the better. But nonetheless, that's what I grew up eating, and I still absolutely adore. All right, here's some of what people call scuppernongs. Believe it or not, scuppernong is a variety, and not just. It's also a name that we use for all of the sort of bronze grapes, but they're technically not scuppernongs because scuppernong is a variety. But nonetheless, this is a seedless grape. Now, the problem is that person's hand is not Andre the Giant, right? They got a normal size hand. That fruit is just a smidgen over BB size. The good part about it is that it starts blooming and starts fruiting in, June, July, and continues until it frosts. All right, it'll just bloom its head off and fruit its little head off. And so I'm a huge fan of razzmatazz. The other problem, it's about $50 a plant. Okay? So I think as these become more available, we'll have fewer issues with that. But nonetheless, if you're looking for a way to make your backyard more fruitful, no pun intended, more productive, this is a good choice. And then Oh My is another one that is available currently. And Oh My has much larger fruit than razzmatazz. They're not huge by any stretch, but they're much larger than razzmatazz. And again, thin skin and seedless. People don't like seeds. I don't know why they don't want to spit seeds. I always thought that was the fun part of muscadines. They don't want it. Seedless muscadines make them happy, and happy people is what we're looking for. All right. So there is your youngest Texas Master Certified Nursery Professional in the state. All right. Here is your call to come to the Bedding Plant Field Day in June the 26th in Overton. Come out. I don't know exactly what time we'll start. People here probably will tell me what time we'll start. That'll be great. And so at any rate, thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, if I've got time, I'll answer them. Yes, ma'am.
What is the best source for all these unusual plants?
Yeah, that is a great question. There's quite a few of them. Quite a few that, like the Manfredas, Mangaves particularly, you can find online, to be honest. There's a lot of opportunity to do that. Tony Avent, Plant Lights, places like that. I think as we're testing more of these plants and once we test them and come up with the quote-unquote winners, we'll push them more. I think there'll be more people around who are producing them. It's a difficult thing, to be honest. At this point in time, the market is so, it's not, I wouldn't call it flooded with new plant material, but it's very difficult to get all of the information, right? You know who you know, and they know the plants they know. But you don't know the person over here who knows these other plants. And so that's kind of what I'm hoping Overton becomes, is more of a centralized place for plant knowledge. And master gardeners are going to be a huge part of that, whole process. Yes, ma'am.
I love magazines and
Yeah.
I do several horticulture magazines, fine gardening, horticulture,
Sure.
garden gate, things like that. Horticulture magazine is really good about when they have new plants listed, they tell you their sources.
Yes, yeah.
So if you guys can get a hold of magazines like that,
Yeah.
they're more, horticulture is more of a science
Yeah,
than pretty yards.
yeah.
They do have pretty yards, but they will give you more sources. You have to do
For
that.
sure.
I'm a mail order, but the shipping today, and get to you in time.
For sure. And many of you are going to get a Texas Gardener today, so that's fun.
Any other questions for Dr. King?
Yes.
One in the back?
What was the name of the small tree that grew in the shade? You said it looked like a normal woodland tree until June. And then
Sweet
it
tea,
looked like-
so it's X Gordoniana. And the X means that it's a cross between two different genera, Gordonia and Franklinia. And so, Gordonia. That's the best we can do. But if you look up sweet tea plant, that'll help you too. Yeah.
You guys have, I know, I've been to the day and field day, you guys have,
No plant sale has been discussed, nor, not yet. Maybe one day.
What time does it start?
Sorry?
What time does it start?
We're gonna say, if you're there by 9 or 9:30, you're not gonna miss anything. Yes, ma'am?
Do you sell any of these plants down there in Kingdom?
I have sold some of them before. Probably gonna be tough to get a hold of them, down there this year, but, yeah. Good question.
Okay, it's almost 1 o'clock, so I'd say we need to wrap up. And I have pins if you need one to do your evaluations. As you exit and put your evaluations on the table, you'll get your Texas Gardener magazine. We really appreciate you coming. We have 4 more months of this.